I survived a crash. After inheriting 11 Miller, when my husband's new wife saw me, she screamed. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, the world was white and quiet. It was too bright. My head hurt. My whole body felt like it was made of glass shards. I couldn't move much. A nurse, a kind woman with soft hands, was checking tubes. She smiled when she saw my eyes open. She said my name, Lucy Harper. I was 35, a marketing writer from Virginia. I remembered that much. I remembered a lot of things, but my memory felt fuzzy around the edges, like trying to grab smoke. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife, a scream. It was high, raw, and full of terror. My eyes found the doorway. Someone was standing there, a woman. She was young. She was beautiful. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wide. They were fixed on me, and in her eyes, I saw pure, unadulterated fear, as if she'd seen a ghost, a monster, or maybe, just maybe, something much worse, something that shouldn't be. This woman was my husband Eric's new wife. She looked at me like I was a ghost, and in a way she was right. Everyone in their perfect little world believed I was dead, even Eric. That scream, it wasn't just a sound. It was the sound of my old life shattering. It was the sound of a new life beginning. A life I didn't know I wanted. A life I didn't know I deserved. Hi, I'm Lucy. I survived the crash that was supposed to end my life. That crash was supposed to erase me. It was supposed to expose everything my husband had done behind my back. But it didn't erase me. It revealed him. And it changed everything. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? My Uncle James was a myth in our family. He was my father's older brother, but they were like two different species. My father was a man who followed the rules. He worked a steady job in middle management, worried about the mortgage, and believed in keeping his head down. Uncle James, from what I gathered in whispers and half-finished sentences, had never kept his head down in his life. He was the brilliant one, the one who saw the world not as a set of rules, but as a puzzle to be solved and profited from. The official family story was that they had a falling out over the family business, a small hardware store my grandfather had owned. My father wanted to run it the same way it had always been run. Uncle James wanted to expand, to take risks, to turn it into something bigger. The argument, apparently, was the stuff of legend. It ended with Uncle James walking away with a few $100s in his pocket and never looking back. My parents rarely spoke his name. When they did, it was with a tone that mixed envy and disapproval. Your uncle always had to be the smartest man in the room, my father would say with a sigh. My mother would add, well, look where it got him. All that money and no one to share it with. They painted him as a lonely, tragic figure, a man who had chosen money over family. But even as a child, I sensed there was more to it. I sensed their resentment was a shield for their own feelings of inadequacy. He had succeeded on a scale they couldn't comprehend, and it was easier to judge him than to question their own choices. So, when his letter arrived 6 months before his death, it felt like a summons from another world. It was on thick, cream-colored paper, his address embossed at the top. It wasn't an email or a text. It was an intentional act of communication. He wanted to see me. Only me. My parents were baffled. Why you? My mother asked, her brow furrowed. He hasn't spoken to us in 30 years. I didn't have an answer. I hadn't seen him since I was a toddler, but I knew I had to go. His house was less of a home and more of a fortress of solitude. It was a modern structure of glass and stone nestled in the woods, overlooking a river. Inside, it wasn't cold or sterile like I'd imagined. It was filled with books from floor to ceiling. The walls were covered in art, but not the kind Eric would approve of. It was eclectic, personal. There were architectural drawings, antique maps, and vibrant abstract canvases that hummed with energy. Uncle James was older than I expected, frail in a way that made his sharp, intelligent eyes even more striking. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He poured us both a glass of water and looked at me, really looked at me, for a long moment. Your father tells me you're a writer, he said. His voice was raspy but firm. A marketing writer, I corrected automatically. Ad copy, websites. It pays the bills. He waved a dismissive hand. A job is what you do for money. What do you write? No one had ever asked me that. Not my parents, not my friends, and certainly not Eric, who considered any writing not about his art to be trivial. I hesitated, then found myself telling him about the short stories I'd started, but never finished. The ideas I kept in a notebook hidden in my desk drawer. He listened without interruption. He didn't judge or offer advice. He just absorbed my words. He asked about my life with Eric, about my dreams. He had a way of asking questions that peeled back the layers of polite answers and got to the heart of things. "Is he a good man, this artist?" he asked. I said yes, of course, but the way he looked at me made me feel like he could see the lie, or at least the doubt, that I kept hidden even from myself. He saw the way I diminished my own accomplishments to make Eric feel bigger. He saw the way I put my own dreams on a shelf to make room for his. He didn't say it, but I felt it. I felt seen. We talked for hours. He told me about his first real estate deal, how he'd bought a dilapidated building no one wanted and saw the potential beneath the grime. "Everyone looks at what is," he said, tapping his temple. "You have to learn to see what could be, in buildings, in businesses, in people." He showed me his library, pointing out his favorite books. He told me that his estrangement from my father wasn't just about the store. It was about a different way of seeing life. "Your father wanted safety," he explained without malice. "I wanted freedom, and you can rarely have both." Before I left, he put a hand on my shoulder. His touch was light, but his gaze was heavy. "Don't let them dim your light, Lucy. Not your parents, not your husband, no one." I drove home in a daze. The visit had unsettled me. It had planted a seed of dissatisfaction that I tried to ignore. I tried to tell my parents about it, about how kind he was, how interesting. My father just grunted. He was always good at charming people. The subject was closed. 3 months later, the call came. It was from a man named Benjamin Carter, a lawyer with a deep, serious voice. He informed me that my Uncle James had passed away peacefully in his sleep. A wave of genuine sadness washed over me. I'd only spent one afternoon with him, but he had made a bigger impact on me than I'd realized. I thought the call was just a courtesy. Then Mr. Carter asked if I could come to his office. His office was what you'd expect. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, a view of the city. He was formal and polite, but his eyes held a glimmer of curiosity. He didn't know me, and he was about to change my life. "Lucy Harper," he said, looking at a document in front of him. "Your uncle, James Harper, has named you the sole beneficiary of his estate." I stared at him. The words didn't make sense. "Sole beneficiary? There must be a mistake. What about my father?" "Your father was explicitly excluded, Mr. Parr," Carter said, his tone neutral. He then slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a summary of the assets. I saw the number, but my brain refused to process it. $11 million. There were stocks, properties, and a liquid cash account that contained more money than I could ever imagine earning. It felt like a prank, a dream, a mistake. "Why?" I whispered, looking up from the paper. "Why me?" Mr. Carter picked up a thick, cream-colored envelope from his desk. My name was written on it in my uncle's familiar, shaky script. "He left you this," the lawyer said. "Perhaps it will explain." My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was short. "My dearest Lucy, I watched you. In one afternoon, I saw the spirit your father tried so hard to tame. I saw your strength. I saw a life waiting to be lived. This money is a tool, nothing more. It can build things, or it can destroy them. The choice is yours. I only have one piece of advice. Use it wisely. Don't let others use you. True wealth is freedom. Your Uncle James." I read the words over and over. Don't let others use you. A warning. A plea. I thought of my parents and their quiet disapproval. I thought of my job and its soul-crushing deadlines. And a small, traitorous part of my mind thought of Eric. I pushed the thought away. This money would fix everything. It would give us freedom. The freedom my uncle valued so much. I clutched the letter in my hand, the paper a tangible link to the man who saw me, who believed in me, and who had just handed me a future I couldn't yet comprehend. I had no idea that the freedom he spoke of would come at a terrible price. I had no idea that his warning was not just advice, but a prophecy of the storm that was about to break. I met Eric at a small, independent art exhibit in a part of town that was trying to be trendy. The gallery was a converted warehouse with exposed brick and track lighting that made everyone look thoughtful. I was there with a friend from work, mostly for the free wine and a break from writing about enterprise software solutions. Then I saw his paintings. They were huge canvases, explosions of color and raw emotion. They weren't just pretty. They were angry and sad and hopeful all at once. They felt alive. He was standing near them, looking just as intense and chaotic as his work. He had paint under his fingernails and a wild look in his eyes. We started talking and it felt like I'd known him forever. He didn't talk about the weather or jobs. He talked about ideas, about beauty, about the struggle to create something meaningful in a world that only cared about money. He was passionate, and I was a moth to his flame. I, who spent my days making corporate slogans sound appealing, was captivated by someone who seemed to live on a higher, more authentic plane. Our first few years were a whirlwind. We were broke, but it felt romantic. We'd share cheap pizza on the floor of his studio apartment, surrounded by his canvases, and talk until dawn. He made me feel special, like I was the only one who truly understood his genius. He called me his muse. It was the most intoxicating thing anyone had ever called me. I believed in him with every fiber of my being. When we decided to move in together, it was me who signed the lease for a bigger apartment, one with a spare room he could use as a proper studio. It was my steady paycheck that covered the rent, the utilities, and the ever-increasing cost of his art supplies. I told myself it was a partnership. I was the practical one, the anchor that allowed his creative ship to sail. I was investing in our future. But slowly, over time, the dynamic shifted. My role as his supporter became my only role. My own ambitions began to feel small and silly next to his grand artistic vision. When I got a promotion at work, he was barely interested. "That's nice, Luce," he'd said without looking up from his canvas. "Can you pick up some more titanium white on your way home?" His passion, which I had once found so attractive, began to curdle into a kind of artistic arrogance. The world owed him success, and anyone who didn't recognize his genius was an idiot. That included me. His criticisms started small. He'd scoff at the clothes I wore. "So corporate," he'd sneer. He'd belittle my job in front of his friends. "Lucy works in advertising," he'd announce at parties, as if it were a dirty secret. "She sells her soul to the man so I can keep mine." His friends, all struggling artists like him, would nod sagely, and I would force a smile, feeling my face burn with humiliation. The man who once called me his muse now called me too practical, too small-minded, stuck in the matrix. He made me feel like my stability, the very thing that allowed him to pursue his dream, was a character flaw. It was a chain holding him back. I made excuses. So many excuses. He's a tortured artist. He's under immense pressure. He doesn't mean it. I would absorb the barbs and the dismissals, and I would try harder. I would work longer hours to afford the expensive new brand of oil paints he insisted he needed. I would cancel plans with my friends because he'd suddenly decided he was on the verge of a creative breakthrough and needed absolute silence. I shrank myself to make more room for him. My life became a supporting role in the grand drama of his. I was the stagehand, the financier, and the uncredited producer. He was the star. The inheritance from Uncle James felt like a miracle. It was the solution to everything. It wasn't just money. It was validation. It was freedom. My mind raced with possibilities. We could buy a house with a real, dedicated studio for him, one with perfect northern light. He wouldn't have to worry about selling paintings or charming gallery owners anymore. He could just create. He would be happy. And if he was happy, he would be the man I first fell in love with again. The passionate, brilliant artist, not the bitter, angry man he was becoming. This money wouldn't just change our lives. It would save our marriage. It would save us. I was practically vibrating with excitement when I found a quiet moment at work to call him. I stepped into an empty conference room, my heart pounding. I pictured his face, the shock turning into elation. I imagined him dropping everything and rushing to meet me to celebrate. I pictured us laughing, planning, dreaming together again. I dialed his number. He picked up on the fourth ring. "What?" he said. "Not hello, just a flat, impatient what?" "Eric, hi," I started, my excitement faltering slightly. "I have some incredible news." "I'm busy, Lucy," he snapped. I could hear the clatter of things in the background. "I'm in the middle of something. What is it?" "Make it quick!" The coldness in his voice was like a splash of ice water, but I pushed on. I had to. This news was too big, too wonderful. It would change his tone. "It's my Uncle James," I said, my voice a little breathless. "He passed away, but Eric, he left me everything. He left us everything." I paused for dramatic effect, wanting him to ask, to be curious. He just stayed silent. "He left us $11 million. I waited. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't the silence of shock or awe. It was a dead empty silence. A void. Finally, his voice came back, devoid of any emotion. "Oh, that's something." Another pause. "Look, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Don't expect much of a reaction. I'll call you later." And then he hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear. I stood there in the empty conference room. the phone pressed against my face, feeling the warmth of it turn cold. Don't expect much of a reaction. He had reacted as if I'd told him I was stopping for milk on the way home. $11 million. A life-changing, world-altering fortune. And he didn't care. Or rather, he was pretending not to care, which was somehow even crueler. It was a power play. A way of reminding me that even this incredible thing, was less important than whatever he was doing. Less important than him. The joy I had felt just moments before evaporated, leaving a sick, hollow feeling in its place. The beautiful future I had imagined dissolved into dust. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that the best news of my life meant nothing to him. Which meant that I meant nothing to him. I walked back to my desk in a stupor, my body on autopilot. I had a deadline to meet. I had to focus, but my mind was a chaotic storm of his words, of the crushing disappointment. I got in my car to head home, my head pounding. I replayed the conversation. I replayed the last few years of our life together. All the sacrifices, all the excuses, all for a man who couldn't even pretend to be happy for me. I was so lost in the fog of my own heartbreak that I barely registered the traffic around me. I didn't see the semi-truck in my rearview mirror. I didn't see it swerve. I didn't see anything until the world exploded in a symphony of screeching tires and shattering glass. And then, there was only darkness. Waking up was a slow, painful process. The first thing I was aware of was a dull, throbbing pain that seemed to radiate from every part of my body. The second was the rhythmic beeping of a machine next to my bed. My eyelids felt heavy, glued shut. When I finally managed to pry them open, the bright, sterile white of the hospital room assaulted my senses. A nurse with a kind face and gentle hands was adjusting my IV drip. She smiled when she saw my eyes were open. "Welcome back, Lucy," she said softly. "You gave us quite a scare." I had a broken arm set in a heavy cast, 3 cracked ribs that made every breath an agony, and a concussion that made the world feel tilted and blurry. The doctors called me a miracle. They used words like incredibly lucky and astonishing survival. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a collection of broken parts, held together by bandages and tubes. My first coherent thought, my first question, was for Eric. "My husband," I rasped, my throat raw. "Is he here? Does he know?" The nurse's kind smile tightened just a little. "We've contacted him, dear. We've left several messages." Her eyes were full of a pity that I didn't understand yet. I made excuses for him in my head. He was probably frantic. He didn't handle crises well. He hated hospitals. The smell of antiseptic made him anxious. He was an artist, sensitive. He would come. Of course he would come. I clung to that certainty like a life raft. For the first few days, every time the door to my room opened, my heart would leap with a painful jolt of hope, only to crash when it was just a doctor or another nurse. I tried calling him. My good hand shook as I held my phone, which a nurse had retrieved from my personal effects. It went straight to voicemail every time. His mailbox was full. I sent texts. "Eric, I'm awake. I'm at St. Mary's Hospital. Please come." I watched the little notification that said, "Delivered," then "Read," but no reply came. The hours stretched into days. The silence from him was a constant screaming presence in the quiet of my room. It was louder than the beeping machines, more painful than my broken bones. My parents drove down for a visit after a couple of days. Their presence was awkward and strained. My mother fussed over my blankets, avoiding my eyes. My father stood by the window, commenting on the weather. "Well, Lucy, you've really gotten yourself into a pickle this time," he said, as if I had carelessly misplaced my car keys instead of nearly dying. They stayed for less than an hour, citing work and the long drive back. They didn't ask about Eric, and I didn't offer any information. Their inability to provide any real comfort only amplified my profound sense of isolation. After a week of silence, a text message finally appeared on my phone. It was from Eric's number. My fingers were clumsy as I swiped to open it, a desperate hope flaring in my chest. "Heard about accident. Really busy. We'll visit when things calm down." That was it. 20 words. No love, no concern, no relief that I was alive. He wrote accident like it was a minor inconvenience, like a traffic jam. Really busy. Busier than visiting his wife who had almost been killed? Busier than holding my hand or telling me everything would be okay? The empty promise of a future visit was the cruelest part. It was a lie designed to placate me, to shut me up. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he was never coming. The hope I had been clinging to finally died. It withered and turned to ash, leaving behind a cold, heavy emptiness. He wasn't coming. He had abandoned me. He had left me here to heal or to die, and it made no difference to him either way. The pain of that realization was a deeper wound than anything the crash had inflicted. 2 weeks after I'd woken up, my best friend Melanie burst into my room. We'd been friends since college, and she was the sister I never had. But the person standing before me looked different. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes red and swollen. She looked haunted. She rushed to my bedside and grabbed my hand. Her skin was ice cold. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh my God, Lucy, I came as soon as I heard. Everyone thought, what, Mel? What did everyone think?" I asked, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. She took a deep, shuddering breath, tears welling in her eyes and spilling down her cheeks. "Lucy, Eric told everyone you died. The world stopped." The beeping of the machines faded into a dull hum. I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to stone. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, but I knew. I knew from the look on her face that it was the truth. "He held a memorial service for you last week," she choked out, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of horror and grief. "He stood up and gave a eulogy. He talked about your tragic, untimely death. He cried, 'Lucy.' He actually produced tears. I was there. We were all there mourning you. Your parents were there. My parents. They had been at my funeral while I was lying in a hospital bed a few hours away. The thought was so monstrous, so surreal, I couldn't grasp it. Eric had not just abandoned me. He had erased me. He had buried me, mourned me, and moved on. While I was still breathing, Melanie wasn't finished. She squeezed my hand tighter as if bracing me for the final fatal blow. "And Lucy, there's something else. It's why I didn't know you were alive. No one did. He's married someone else." Married. The word was a gunshot in the silent room. It echoed in the space between us, a sound of ultimate betrayal. Married. It wasn't just that he had moved on. It was the speed, the audacity, the sheer breathtaking cruelty of it. He had replaced me. While I lay broken and alone, fighting my way back to a life he had already declared over, he was starting a new one. He had stood before friends and family, faked his grief for me, and then pledged his life to another woman. He hadn't just let me die. In his world, in the world he had created for everyone else, he had made sure I was dead and gone. Her name was Vanessa, Melanie told me, her voice laced with disgust. She had done some digging online after the shock of the wedding announcement. It wasn't hard to find her. Eric was flaunting her, flaunting their new life. I told Melanie I needed to see. She tried to talk me out of it, saying it would only cause me more pain, but I had to. I needed to see the woman who had taken my place. I needed to see the life that was built on top of my grave. With trembling fingers, I took Melanie's phone and she typed the name into a social media app. Her profile was public, a curated gallery of a perfect life. And there she was, young, probably in her mid-20s, stylish, with an effortless confidence that I had never quite managed to possess. And she was undeniably beautiful, with long dark hair and a smile that lit up her entire face. The photos were a series of brutal stabs to my heart. There was one of them at a gallery opening, the same one where Eric had debuted a new piece a few weeks ago. He had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, a proud, possessive gesture. He was smiling at the camera, a genuine, unforced smile that I hadn't seen on his face in years. She was leaning into him, radiant in a red dress. In another, they were toasting with champagne flutes at a fancy restaurant I recognized, the one Eric had always said was too pretentious when I suggested we go for our anniversary. They were holding hands. They looked happy. They looked disgustingly in love. Then I saw a picture that made me feel physically ill. It was taken in our apartment. My apartment. In the background, I could see the living room, but it was different. My throw pillows were gone, replaced by sleek, modern cushions. My bookshelf had been rearranged. It was my home, but it had been scrubbed clean of my existence. She was there, in my space, living my life. Or rather, the life I was supposed to have. As I scrolled, my initial feelings of rage and grief began to mix with something else. A strange, unsettling sense of familiarity. I kept going back to her face. There was something about the curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes when she smiled. It was like looking at a distorted reflection. I told Melanie to pull up some of my old college photos on her phone. We put them side by side. A photo of me at 21, bright-eyed and full of hope, next to a recent photo of Vanessa. The resemblance was uncanny. It wasn't that we were identical, not like twins, but we were cast from the same mold. We had the same dark hair, the same fair skin, the same facial structure. She was a younger, shinier, unbroken version of me. This wasn't a coincidence. My blood ran cold. This was a deliberate choice. He hadn't just replaced me. He had replicated me. It was a monstrous, twisted act. He had found a woman who looked enough like me to be my ghost. and he had installed her in my life. Was he trying to pretend I had never been in a crash? Was he so narcissistic that he had a type so specific it bordered on duplication? Or was it something even more sinister? I felt a wave of nausea. Who was this woman? Did she know any of this? Was she a victim? Or was she a willing participant in this nightmare? The final piece of the puzzle was delivered by a phone call a few days later. It was Benjamin Carter, my uncle's lawyer. His voice was low and grim. "Lucy, I'm glad I could reach you. I have some disturbing news," he began. "I think I'm getting used to that," I said, my voice flat. He cleared his throat. "Your husband, Eric Matthews, came to my office this morning." My grip on the phone tightened. "What did he want?" "He presented me with a copy of your death certificate," Mr. Carter said, and I could hear the restrained anger in his tone. "It appears to be a forgery, but a convincing one." He also had a marriage license, dated just last week, to a woman named Vanessa. He was petitioning to have your uncle's estate transferred to him as your surviving spouse and sole heir. The room spun. All the pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This was never just about a new woman. This was never just about him moving on. This was about $11 million. My accident had been a golden opportunity for him, a tragic, convenient event that allowed him to get everything he ever wanted. He didn't have to divorce me. He didn't have to share the inheritance. He could just declare me dead, fake a death certificate, and walk away with the entire fortune. The new wife, the girl who looked like me, she was part of the plan. A prop? Maybe she was his key to appearing like a grieving husband moving on, making his claim seem more legitimate. He had seen his chance, and he had taken it without a moment's hesitation. He hadn't just abandoned me in the hospital. He had actively worked to ensure my legal and social death so he could steal my inheritance. The pain and sadness that had been drowning me for weeks began to burn away, replaced by a cold, hard rage. The fire of it was clarifying. It burned away the tears, the weakness, the victimhood. He thought I was a ghost. He thought I was a memory. He thought he had won, but he had made one critical, fatal error. He had failed to make sure I was actually dead. I was alive. I was broken and bruised, lying in a hospital bed, but I was breathing. And I was thinking, the man I had loved had tried to bury me. Now, I was going to be the ghost that came back to haunt him. I looked at Melanie, the fire now reflected in my eyes. "He wants my money," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "He thinks I'm dead and gone." A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. "So," I said, "I think it's time we set a trap." The plan was terrifyingly simple. In the movies, there are intricate schemes and elaborate setups. In my reality, the plan was built on one thing: Eric's greed. My lawyer, Benjamin, confirmed it was the only thing that had ever truly motivated him. Greed and an ego so large it blocked out the sun. He believed he was the smartest person in any room. He believed he had committed the perfect crime. That arrogance was the weakness I would exploit. Melanie was my general. While I was still hooked up to monitors, she was my hands and feet in the outside world. She was the one who, with the help of a sympathetic young nurse named Chloe, managed to install the camera. It wasn't a fancy spy gadget. It was a tiny webcam, the kind you clip onto a laptop, tucked into a large bouquet of flowers Melanie had brought in. It was aimed directly at the foot of my bed and the doorway. Chloe ensured the Wi-Fi signal was strong, and Melanie had the live feed running on a tablet she kept hidden in her purse. Benjamin had advised us on the legality. As long as I was a party to the conversation in my own room, I was within my rights to record it. This wasn't for a court of law, not yet. This was for the truth. The next step was the bait. I couldn't message him from my phone. He thought I was dead. Using Melanie's phone was also too risky. He knew her number. We needed a neutral party. Melanie had a friend, someone Eric had met casually once or twice but wouldn't know well, who agreed to help. The message had to be perfect. It had to be alarming enough to make him act immediately, but vague enough not to give the whole game away. We workshopped it for an hour. Lucy's alive was too direct. It would give him time to run, to hide assets, to create a new story. We needed him to walk into the trap willingly. That's when I remembered the truck driver. In one of my conversations with a police officer, he had mentioned the driver of the semi-truck was also in critical condition. His name was Morgan. "That's it," I whispered to Melanie. The message we sent from her friend's phone was short and cryptic. "Morgan's awake. He remembers everything." We didn't specify who we were. We let his guilty conscience do the work. If the crash was a random accident, the message meant nothing. But if Eric had any connection to it, if he had perhaps paid someone to arrange it, this message would be a lit match tossed into a room full of gasoline. Even if he hadn't, the idea of a loose end, a witness to the event that allowed him to claim my fortune, would be something he'd feel compelled to control. We sent the message at 10 a.m. For hours, nothing happened. I lay in bed, my heart a frantic drum against my broken ribs. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. I was a nervous wreck, but on the outside I practiced looking frail, confused, and weak. I had to be the ghost he thought I was, not the avenging angel I felt myself becoming. Melanie sat in the chair by my bed, pretending to read a magazine, her hand never far from the tablet in her bag. At 3:15 p.m. they arrived. Chloe, the nurse, popped her head in first. "You have some visitors, Lucy," she said, her eyes giving me a quick, reassuring glance. Then she stepped aside. Eric walked in. He looked magnificent, and that was the most sickening part. He wasn't the struggling, paint-splattered artist anymore. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. A ridiculously expensive-looking watch gleamed on his wrist. His hair was perfectly styled. He had transformed himself into the man of wealth he always believed he deserved to be. He looked polished, successful, and utterly reptilian. His face was a mask of practiced concern. He rushed to my bedside, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. "Lucy! Oh my God, you're alive!" he exclaimed, his voice a pitch-perfect imitation of shocked relief. He reached to take my hand, but I flinched away, a movement that was only half-acting. "We were so worried. The hospital told me. They said you didn't make it. I've been grieving. I've been a wreck." He was a phenomenal actor. I had to give him that. Tears welled in his eyes. He looked down, shaking his head as if overcome with emotion. "This is a miracle," he whispered. I just stared at him, my silence making him visibly uncomfortable. His eyes darted around the room, looking for something, maybe a sign of how much I knew. He was trying to get a read on the situation. "I know this is all so confusing for you," he said, his voice dropping to a soothing, patronizing tone. "You've been through a terrible trauma." He gestured toward the doorway, as if remembering his companion. "There's someone here I want you to meet. Someone who's been a huge support to me through all of this." And then she stepped inside. Vanessa. In person, she was even more striking, and the resemblance to my younger self was chilling. She was wearing a simple, elegant dress, and she clutched a small purse to her chest. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She looked at me in the bed, and her brow furrowed in confusion. Eric smiled, a broad salesman's smile. "Lucy, you remember Vanessa, right? Your cousin's daughter?" The room tilted. "My cousin's daughter?" My cousin Sarah had a daughter she'd given up for adoption years ago. I had never met her. I didn't even know her name. A cold dread, heavier and more terrifying than anything I had felt before, washed over me. This was a new layer of betrayal, a new depth of his depravity. He hadn't just found a random look-alike. He had sought out a member of my own family. Vanessa took a hesitant step forward. She was looking at me, really looking, her head tilted. The flicker of confusion in her eyes was turning into dawning recognition. It was as if she was comparing my face to a picture she had studied 1,000 times. Her gaze dropped to my hands, then back to my eyes. Eric, oblivious, continued his performance. "Vanessa and I reconnected a while back, and we've been helping each other through this terrible time. She lost you too, in a way. She was so excited to finally meet you." Vanessa's face had gone completely pale. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, which were a deep, familiar shade of brown, were wide with a horror that had nothing to do with my injuries. She was looking at me like she was seeing the impossible. She took another step closer. She seemed to have forgotten Eric was even in the room. Her world had shrunk to the space between my hospital bed and her. "No," she whispered, the word a puff of air. "It can't be." And then she screamed. It was the same scream I had heard in my semi-conscious state when I first woke up, the scream that had shattered the silence. High, raw, and full of a terror so profound it seemed to shake the very walls. It was a scream of shattered reality. Eric rushed to her side. "Vanessa, what's wrong?" "It's okay. She's alive. It's a good thing." But Vanessa couldn't hear him. Her eyes were locked on mine, tears streaming down her face. Her body was trembling. She looked at Eric, then back at me, her face a mask of horrified understanding. The scream died in her throat, replaced by a choked, ragged sob. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words torn from the deepest part of her soul as she looked at me. "The woman in the hospital bed, the ghost who was supposed to be dead. She's my mother!" The world stopped spinning and then shattered into a million pieces. Vanessa's words echoed in the sterile white room, a confession and an accusation all in one. "She's my mother!" Eric froze, his hand still on her arm, the charming mask of the grieving husband finally cracking. His eyes darted between me and the hysterical young woman beside him. The calculating machine in his brain was visibly whirring, trying to process this new, impossible variable that had just destroyed his perfect plan. My own mind was reeling, thrown back 17 years to a different sterile white room. I was 18 years old, scared, and utterly alone. I was a child myself, about to have a child. My parents were horrified, not for me, but for themselves, for the shame it would bring, for what the neighbors would say. They were masters of appearances, my parents. Their solution was swift and clinical: adoption. It was, they insisted, for the best. For the baby's best interest, they said, but I knew it was for theirs. They would find a good family, a family that was prepared, a family that wouldn't be a source of gossip. I remember holding her for the first and last time. She was so small, so perfect. A tiny, wrinkled creature with a full head of dark hair. She had my eyes. I knew it the moment I looked at her. I spent 1 hour with her. 60 precious minutes. I memorized every feature of her face. I kissed her forehead. I whispered that I loved her and that I was so sorry. Then a nurse came and took her away. My parents signed the papers. They told me to forget, to move on, to pretend it never happened. It was a secret to be buried. But I never forgot. Not for a single day. I thought about her on her birthday every year. I wondered what she looked like, if she was happy, if she was loved. She was a ghost who lived in a locked room in my heart. And now, that ghost was standing before me, screaming my name. Vanessa fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking violently. She pulled out a worn folded wallet. From a plastic sleeve, she extracted a faded photograph. It was dog-eared and softened with age, clearly looked at thousands of times. She held it out, her hand trembling. It was a picture of me, at 18, sitting on a hospital bed, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. My face in the photo was puffy from crying, but I was looking down at the baby with an expression of pure, heartbreaking love. "I've carried this my whole life," Vanessa whispered, her voice ragged. "My adoptive parents gave it to me when I was old enough to understand. It was the only thing I had of you. They told me you were young, that you wanted me to have a better life." The story he had spun was starting to become clear. He hadn't just stumbled upon her, he had hunted for her. I remembered the old memory box I kept in the back of my closet. It was a shoebox filled with my teenage secrets. Concert ticket stubs, old letters, and a few small, precious mementos from my pregnancy. The original copy of that photograph, the hospital bracelet with a blank space where her name should have been. I had kept it hidden, a secret shrine to the daughter I had lost. Eric must have found it. He was always snooping, always looking for leverage, for anything he could use. He must have used the information in that box, the name of the adoption agency, my cousin's connection, to track her down. "He found me," Vanessa said, turning her tear-filled, accusing eyes on Eric. "He found me a few months ago. He told me he was your husband. He said you were finally ready to meet me. He said you were scared, that you needed him to make the first move. He made me feel chosen, wanted." She was talking to me now, her voice pleading for understanding. "He said you wanted to reconnect, but that we had to take it slow. He told me you were fragile, that this inheritance from your uncle had brought up a lot of old family trauma and you needed time. It was diabolical. He had used her deepest desire, the desire to know her biological mother, as a weapon. He had dangled the promise of me in front of her, all while planning to get rid of me and marry her. He was grooming her, manipulating her, playing on her emotions. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was stealing my daughter, too. You used me," Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss as she turned back to Eric. The grief on her face was hardening into the same cold fury that had been fueling me. Eric finally dropped the act. The fake concern vanished, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. The monster was out. "Don't be so dramatic," he spat. "You got what you wanted. You wanted a family. You wanted a connection. I gave you one. This isn't a family. This is a lie," she screamed. "This was business," he said, his voice cold and flat. "You were a means to an end. You look like her. You have a plausible connection to the family. It was perfect. You were perfect. But you, like her," he said, gesturing a thumb at me, "are far too emotional." That's when I moved. I pressed the call button for the nurse, the one Chloe had told me to use if things went wrong. It was a silent alarm that went directly to the hospital security desk. I had pressed it the moment he'd shown his true face. Eric seemed to realize the game was up. His eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of genuine panic. The trap had snapped shut. He looked at me, at Vanessa, at the door. He made his choice. He turned to flee. He grabbed Vanessa's arm, perhaps to use her as a shield or just to pull her out of his way. "We're leaving!" he hissed. "Get your hands off me!" She shrieked, yanking her arm away with surprising strength. He didn't make it 2 steps. The door to the room burst open, and 2 large hospital security guards filled the frame. They were big, no-nonsense men who had clearly been briefed. "Eric Matthews?" one of them said, his voice calm but firm. Eric froze, his back to them. He looked like a cornered rat. There seems to be a misunderstanding here, he began, trying to summon his earlier charm, but his voice was strained. Sir, we need you to come with us, the second guard said. Stepping into the room, he tried to bolt, to push past them, but they were too quick. They each took an arm, their grips firm and unyielding. The fight went out of him instantly. His expensive suit suddenly looked cheap and ill-fitting. The powerful, successful man from a few minutes ago was gone, replaced by a pathetic, frightened criminal. As they escorted him out, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no remorse in them, no apology, just pure, seething hatred. He hated me not for what he had done, but for the one thing I had failed to do, die. The guards led him away. The room was suddenly blessedly quiet. It was just me and Vanessa, my daughter, a stranger who shared my DNA and my betrayal. She stood in the middle of the room, looking lost, her body still trembling from the shock and the adrenaline. The faded photograph was still clutched in her hand. The silence between us was vast, filled with 17 years of unspoken words, of questions and pain. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of hope and fear. And for the first time since waking up in this hospital, I let myself cry. The aftermath of the confrontation was a controlled whirlwind. As soon as the security guards escorted a sputtering, threatening Eric out of my room, Melanie was on the phone with Benjamin Carter. I could hear her relaying the events in a low, clipped voice, her hand shaking with adrenaline. We got it all, Ben. We have it on video. His confession, everything. Within the hour, Benjamin was at the hospital, accompanied by 2 detectives from the local police department. They were professional, somber-faced, and they listened to my story with a quiet intensity that was deeply reassuring. I told them everything, from Uncle James's letter to Eric's cold reaction on the phone, to the abandonment, the fake memorial, and the final horrific confrontation. Melanie handed over the tablet with the video file. They watched it right there in my room, their expressions hardening with every word out of Eric's mouth. When it got to the part where he sneered, "This was business," one of the detectives let out a low whistle and shook his head. Vanessa, my daughter, it was still so strange to think that word, gave her statement as well. She sat on the visitor's chair, wrapped in a hospital blanket, and spoke in a low, steady voice that belied the trauma she had just endured. She told them how Eric had contacted her through a private investigator, how he had fed her a carefully constructed story of my desire to reconnect. She laid out the timeline of their whirlwind romance and marriage, a timeline that now seemed so obviously predatory. She was a victim twice over, first by my parents' decision, and now by Eric's monstrous manipulation. Seeing her strength, her composure in the face of such a profound betrayal, filled me with a sense of awe. This was my daughter. She was a survivor, just like me. The legal machine began to grind, and it moved with surprising speed. With the video evidence and our corroborating testimonies, the district attorney's office had an ironclad case. Benjamin filed the civil charges the very next day, freezing all my assets to prevent Eric from accessing a single penny. The criminal charges followed swiftly. Felony fraud for the inheritance claim, bigamy, identity theft for the use of my personal information, and conspiracy for the forged death certificate. The detectives, spurred by the calculated nature of the crime, even opened an investigation into the crash itself. They found no direct evidence linking Eric to it. It seemed to have been a genuinely random, tragic accident, but his actions afterward painted a picture of a man with a chillingly opportunistic and criminal mindset. Eric's world crumbled. The man who had worn a suit of smug invincibility was now just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. Melanie kept me updated on the details, feeding me information she gleaned from public records and news reports. His bail was set at an astronomical amount, which he couldn't pay since all of my, and therefore his assets were frozen. His artist friends, the ones who had praised his genius and belittled my practicality, vanished. They didn't visit him. They didn't support him. He was a pariah. The detectives uncovered a mountain of evidence. They found the graphic designer Eric had paid in cash to create the fake death certificate. They tracked the digital trail of his attempts to transfer funds from my accounts to an offshore one just hours after his fraudulent wedding to Vanessa. They found his search history, filled with queries like how to claim inheritance for deceased spouse and legal loopholes for probate court. Every piece of evidence was another nail in his coffin. He tried to fight it, of course. His court-appointed lawyer attempted to argue that Eric was suffering from a grief-induced delusion, that he had genuinely believed I was dead, and his actions were those of a distraught, confused man. The video of him sneering, "This was business," demolished that defense in about 5 seconds. He tried to paint me as a vindictive, unstable woman. He tried to paint Vanessa as a co-conspirator who had turned on him. None of it stuck. The truth was too clear, too ugly. A few weeks before the trial was set to begin, a letter arrived for me at the hospital. It was from him. My first instinct was to tear it up, to burn it without reading it. But I needed to see what his last, desperate move was. It wasn't an apology. It was a plea, a pathetic, self-serving ramble about his artistic soul, about the pressures he was under, about how I never truly understood him. He wrote about the life we could have had with the money. He begged me to tell the lawyers it was all a misunderstanding. He was begging for mercy. I held the letter in my hands and thought about the weeks I had spent lying in that bed, alone, waiting for him. I thought about him holding my memorial service, crying fake tears while I fought for my life. I thought about him using my daughter, my own flesh and blood, as a pawn in his disgusting game. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Mercy is an ode to those who would watch you die. Mercy is a gift, and he had forfeited any right to it. I handed the letter to Benjamin, who entered it into evidence as another example of Eric's attempts to manipulate the case. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the certainty of a long prison sentence, Eric took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to fraud and bigamy in exchange for the other charges being dropped. Benjamin called to tell me the news. "He's been sentenced," he said. 8 years in state prison. With good behavior, he might be out in 5 years. It didn't feel like enough, and yet it felt like a lifetime. It was an ending. A definitive, legal, and emotional full stop. Benjamin asked if I wanted to attend the final hearing to give a victim impact statement. I thought about it for a moment. I imagined standing in a courtroom, looking at the man who had destroyed my old life. I imagined telling him exactly how much he had hurt me. And then I realized I had nothing left to say to him. He was no longer a character in my story. He was just a footnote. "No," I told Benjamin. "I don't need to be there." I had already buried him in my heart. His prison was made of steel and concrete, but mine had been made of his indifference and betrayal, and I was finally free of it. His legal reckoning was complete, but my real healing, the part that mattered most, was just beginning. After the storm of Eric's arrest and the legal proceedings, an unnerving quiet settled in. The detectives stopped visiting. The calls from Benjamin became less frequent. The drama that had consumed my life began to recede, leaving a vast, empty space in its wake. And in that space was Vanessa. She stayed. After giving her statement to the police, she didn't run. She didn't disappear to process the monumental shock of finding her mother and losing her husband in the same horrific afternoon. She pulled the uncomfortable visitor's chair to my bedside, and she stayed. Our first few days were a study in awkward tenderness. We were two complete strangers, bound by blood and a shared trauma. We didn't know where to begin. What do you say to the daughter you gave away? What do you say to the mother who you believed had never wanted you? We started with small things. She asked about my favorite color. I asked about her favorite band. She told me about her adoptive parents, a kind, loving couple in Ohio who were, she assured me, completely devastated and supportive. They had always been honest with her about her adoption, and their love for her was the anchor that had kept her from shattering completely. I told her about my life, the real one, not the one Eric had manufactured. I told her about my job, my love for writing, my Uncle James. I didn't tell her about the day I gave her up. Not yet. It was too soon. The wound's still too raw for both of us. But we talked around it. She told me how she'd always felt a piece of her was missing, how she'd spent her teenage years staring at that one faded photograph, inventing stories about me. I told her how I'd kept a hidden box of memories, how I marked her birthday on a private calendar every single year. We were tracing the outlines of the hole we had left in each other's lives. There were moments of profound sadness. One afternoon, she looked at me and asked, her voice small, "Did you ever regret it?" The question hung in the air. I looked at her beautiful, hopeful, terrified face, a face that was a mirror of my own, and I gave her the only honest answer I could. "I regretted losing you every single day," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I have never, not for 1 second, regretted that you had a life filled with love and stability, the kind I couldn't have given you then." Tears streamed down both our faces. It wasn't an absolution, but it was a beginning. Her adoptive parents, Mark and Sarah, called me. It was one of the most difficult phone calls of my life. I stumbled through apologies, trying to explain the mess their daughter had been dragged into because of her connection to me. But they met me with nothing but grace. "You gave us the greatest gift of our lives, Lucy," Sarah said, her voice warm and steady. Vanessa is our daughter and we love her. Now it seems she has two mothers who love her. We are all on her side. That's all that matters. Their kindness was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. They weren't my competition. They were my allies in loving this incredible young woman. When the day finally came for me to be discharged from the hospital, the question of where I would go loomed large. I couldn't go back to my old apartment, the one Eric and Vanessa had shared. It was tainted. My parents had offered a half-hearted invitation to stay with them, but I knew I couldn't. Their home was a place of old hurts and unspoken secrets. Then I remembered my uncle's estate. It was mine now, a large, quiet house in the countryside that I had only seen once. It was a sanctuary. I'm going there, I told Vanessa. She looked at me, her expression hesitant. Can I come with you? Just for a little while? A wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me over washed through me. She wanted to be with me. She was choosing me. Yes, I said, the word coming out as a sob. Yes, of course. The house was even more beautiful than I remembered. It was filled with light and books and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. It felt like coming home, even though I'd never been there before. For the first few weeks, Vanessa and I moved around each other like cautious satellites. We were two strangers trying to learn the rhythm of living together. We had awkward dinners where we talked about the weather. We had long silences where we would both just read in the enormous library. But slowly, the awkwardness began to melt away. It was replaced by shared jokes, by comfortable routines. We discovered we both loved old black and white movies. We found out we both hated cilantro. We were building a bridge across 17 years of silence, one small, ordinary moment at a time. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth. I had been thinking about the money, the $11 million that had caused so much destruction. My uncle had said it was freedom. For Eric, it had been a motive for a crime. For me, I realized, its purpose was something else entirely. I turned to Benjamin, my lawyer, and had him draw up the paperwork. A few days later, I sat down with Vanessa at the large oak dining table. I want to give you something, I said, sliding a folder across the table to her. She opened it, her eyes scanning the legal documents inside. Her brow furrowed in confusion, then her eyes widened in shock. Lucy, no, this is half. This is millions of dollars. I can't take this. It's not a gift, I said softly, and it was never really mine to keep. My parents made a decision for me 17 years ago that cost me you. It cost you a part of your story. Nothing can fix that, but this is a restoration. It's the future you should have had access to. It's security. It's a start. My uncle said true wealth was freedom. I want you to be free, Vanessa. To do whatever you want. To build a life without worrying about anything. She stared at the papers, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I know, I said. I wanted to. In that moment, the money stopped being a source of trauma and became what my uncle had always intended it to be. A tool to build something new, a tool to heal. And as my daughter, my brilliant, brave, beautiful daughter, came around the table and wrapped her arms around me in a hug that was 17 years in the making, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We weren't just two broken people. We were a family, and we were finally home. A year later, Vanessa and I stood on the wide stone porch of my uncle's house as the sun set over the rolling Virginia hills. The winter snow glowed gold on the fields, and the air was crisp and clean. A year ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, a collection of broken bones and shattered certainties. Now, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt completely whole. Our life was quiet, and that quiet was beautiful. Vanessa had decided to go back to school to study landscape architecture, inspired by the sprawling gardens on the estate. She spent her days sketching, and her evenings telling me all about soil acidity and perennials. Her adoptive parents, Mark and Sarah, had visited several times. They were wonderful people who fit into our strange new family with an easy grace. We had Thanksgiving together, a loud, happy, slightly chaotic affair. There was no jealousy or rivalry, only a shared fierce love for Vanessa. Eric's betrayal, a wound that I thought would never heal, now felt like a distant scar. It had destroyed my marriage, but in doing so, it had exposed a truth I would have never found otherwise. It brought me my daughter. His greed had been the unlikely key that unlocked the secret room in my heart. I often thought of my uncle's letter, the paper now soft and worn from how many times I'd read it. True wealth isn't money, it's freedom. I finally understood what he meant. The money had given me this house, this security, but the freedom, the real freedom, came from shedding the life that was slowly suffocating me. It was the freedom from a man who saw me as a convenience, the freedom from a past filled with shame and secrets. I thought the crash broke me, but it didn't. It broke the cage I had been living in. It was a violent, brutal, and terrifying rescue. My name is Lucy Harper, and sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because sometimes surviving isn't the end of the story. It's the start.